Nobody in the galactic community had ever submitted a request quite like it. The council clerks at Concord Station passed the document around 3 times before confirming it was real. The humans wanted permission to throw a party. Not a political banquet, not a trade dinner. A holiday celebration, open to every species on the station, complete with decorations, music, food, and gifts for children. Captain Diana Reeves had written the proposal herself, sitting in the cramped office aboard her ship, the Hearthlight. She had spent 2 nights choosing every word carefully. Humans had only been part of the galactic community for 11 years. They were still newcomers, still proving themselves. Every move they made was watched, judged, and remembered. But December was December, no matter how far from Earth she was. And Diana Reeves was not the kind of woman who let a little thing like being surrounded by aliens stop her from celebrating. The proposal went before the station council the next morning. The council chamber was a wide, curved room with seats arranged in a half circle. Representatives from 26 species filled the rows, their translators humming softly as Reeves stood at the center podium and explained her idea. She kept it simple, a cultural exchange event, a chance for humans to share one of their oldest traditions with the galactic community. Food that was safe for every species present. Music, lights, and a small gift for every child on the station. For a moment, the chamber was quiet. Then Ambassador Grell of the Dathani hegemony leaned forward in his seat. Grell was tall and thin, with a hard exoskeleton that clicked when he moved. His species had been part of the galactic community for over 600 years. They were traders, politicians, and they did not suffer what they considered foolishness. "Let me understand," Grell said, his translator turning his clicks and hisses into flat, precise words. "You wish to use station resources to hang colored objects from the ceiling and distribute toys to children. We will fund it entirely ourselves," Reeves said. "That is not the point." Grell stood, addressing the full council. "This is a trade summit, the most important economic gathering in the sector, and the humans wish to turn it into a nursery festival." A few delegates laughed. "Not many, but enough. Every species has traditions," Reeves said calmly. "We are not asking anyone to participate, only for permission to share ours." "And what exactly do your traditions accomplish?" Grell asked. "Do they generate revenue? Do they advance technology? Do they secure alliances?" Reeves looked at him steadily. "They remind us what matters." Grell made a sharp clicking sound that his translator did not bother to convert. "Dismissal. Pure dismissal." The debate lasted 40 minutes. Grell argued that the event would be a distraction. 2 other delegations supported him. Several more stayed silent, unwilling to take sides. The Fenari delegation, a species known for their strong family bonds, listened closely but said nothing. Counselor Shale of the Mirati Collective sat in her water-filled seat, her translucent skin shifting colors as she listened. She watched Reeves with large, layered eyes that blinked slowly. When the vote was called, Shale abstained. The proposal passed by 3 votes. Grell stood immediately. "You have your permission," he said, looking directly at Reeves. "And when this event proves to everyone here exactly how childish your species truly is, I will be the first to remind you." Reeves did not flinch. She thanked the council, collected her documents, and walked out of the chamber with her back straight and her face calm. Lieutenant Rami Osei was waiting outside. He was a tall man with kind eyes and a datapad permanently attached to his hand. He served as the ship's cultural liaison, which mostly meant he was the person who fixed problems before they became disasters. "How bad?" he asked. "We got it," Reeves said. Rami exhaled. "By how much?" 3 votes. "That is not exactly a warm welcome." Reeves smiled. "We do not need a warm welcome. We need a guest list." They walked together through the station corridors, passing clusters of aliens who barely glanced at them. Humans were still a curiosity here. Small, soft, emotional. Most species tolerated them. Few respected them. "How many children are on the station?" Reeves asked. Rami checked his datapad. "Preliminary count is somewhere around 400. 19 different species. Then we need 400 gifts." Rami stopped walking. "Diana, our crew is 63 people." "I know. 400 personalized gifts for 19 species, with different biologies, different cultures, different ideas about what a gift even means. I know. Rami stared at her for a long moment. Then he shook his head and started typing on his datapad. I will need access to the station's species database. Biological profiles, cultural files, everything. Already requested. And materials? We will use what we have. Repurpose, recycle, build from scratch if we have to. Rami looked at her. You really think this matters that much? Reeve stopped walking. She turned to face him, and for just a moment, the calm diplomatic mask fell away. Underneath was something fiercer. Something that had nothing to do with politics or trade or proving humanity's worth to the galaxy. There are 400 children on this station, she said quietly. Most of them have never received a gift from a stranger. Some of them come from species that do not even have a word for it. She paused. Every child deserves to know that someone thought about them. That is not childish. That is the whole point. Rami held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. I will get the crew together tonight, he said. Reeve smiled. Tell them to bring their best ideas. We have a lot of work to do. The cargo bay of the Hearthlight had never been used for anything like this before. Within 12 hours of the council vote, Rami had turned it into a workshop. Tables were dragged in from the mess hall. Toolkits were pulled from engineering storage. Every spare container, sheet of fabric, and scrap of recyclable material on the ship was collected and sorted into neat piles along the walls. And every single member of the 63-person crew had shown up. Rami stood at the front of the bay with his datapad and addressed the room. He explained the task simply. 412 children, 19 species. Each gift had to be safe for the recipient's biology, respectful of their culture, and personal enough to mean something. We are not making generic boxes of junk, Rami said. Every child gets something made for them. A hand went up near the back. It was Dr. Felix Okonkwo, the ship's physician. He was a quiet man with thick hands and gentle eyes, the kind of person who listened more than he talked. I carve, he said simply. Small figures. Wood and composite. I can make about 4 a day if I skip sleep. Nobody is skipping sleep, Reeve said from the doorway. She had been standing there listening. We have 9 days. We work in shifts. Nobody burns out. Felix nodded. Then he pulled a small block of synthetic wood from his pocket and started carving right there in his seat. The research phase came first. Rami divided the crew into teams, each assigned to a cluster of species. They dug into the station's cultural database, reading everything they could find about the children they would be making gifts for. The Fenari were warm-blooded mammals with thick fur. Their children loved soft textures and bright colors. The crew's textile specialist, a young woman named Adiz, began cutting fabric into small animal shapes and stuffing them with hypoallergenic filling. The Mirati were aquatic in origin. Their children had sensitive skin that dried out in station air. Rami found a formula for a water-safe sealant and worked with the engineers to create small waterproof puzzle boxes that could be played with in wet environments. The Dathani were the hardest. Their culture was rigid and hierarchical. Children were expected to be quiet, obedient, and invisible. The database had almost nothing about what Dathani children enjoyed because enjoyment was not considered important in their society. Felix spent a long evening reading Dathani nursery archives, searching for anything that might give him a clue. He found it buried in an old educational text. A creature from Dathani folk tales, a small 6-legged animal called a thresh, was mentioned in stories told to very young children before they entered formal schooling. After that age, such stories were considered beneath them. But every Dathani child knew the thresh. Felix began carving one that night. The days blurred together. The cargo bay hummed with activity at all hours. Engineers used 3D fabricators to print toy components. Kitchen staff experimented with treats, carefully testing each recipe against alien biological profiles to make sure nothing would cause a reaction. One crew member, a linguist named Sam, handwrote short greeting cards in 12 different alien scripts, practicing each character until it was correct. Word spread quietly around the station that the humans were up to something. Aliens passing the Hearthlight's docking port could hear music drifting from inside, along with laughter and the occasional sound of someone cursing at a stubborn piece of wrapping material. Most aliens ignored it. Some watched from a distance with expressions that translators could not quite read. Ambassador Grell made a point of walking past the Hearthlight every day. He never stopped. He never spoke to the humans. But he watched, and each time his exoskeleton clicked a little faster, a sound his translator helpfully identified as irritation. They are wasting days they should spend preparing trade proposals, he told his aide. When this is over, the council will see them for what they are. Sentimental children playing at diplomacy. But not everyone agreed with Grell. On the fifth night, Counselor Shale appeared at the entrance to the cargo bay. She moved quietly on her short legs, her translucent skin glowing faintly blue in the corridor light. Rami almost walked into her. "Counselor," he said, surprised. "Can I help you?" Shale looked past him into the bay. She watched the humans working. A woman was painting a small wooden toy with careful strokes. Two engineers were arguing cheerfully about the best way to make a spinning top that would work in low gravity. Felix sat in the corner, carving, his hands moving with slow precision. "Why do you do this?" Shale asked softly. Rami thought about it. He could have given a diplomatic answer, something about cultural exchange or building goodwill. But Shale's eyes were wide and earnest, and she had come here alone, late at night, when nobody would see her. So he told her the truth. "Because no child should ever feel forgotten," he said. Shale did not respond immediately. Her skin shifted through several colors, too fast for Rami to read. Then she turned and walked away without another word. Rami watched her go. He was not sure what had just happened. But the next morning, a crate appeared outside the Hearthlight's docking port. It contained crafting supplies, high-quality materials that the humans could not have afforded. There was no name attached, no note, no sender information. Rami brought the crate inside and showed it to Reeves. She looked at the materials for a long moment. Then she smiled. "Someone out there is paying attention," she said. "Let's make sure we do not waste it." The crew worked even harder after that. Not because they had been ordered to, not because they were trying to prove anything to the galaxy, because 400 children were counting on them, even if those children did not know it yet. The laughter started in the officers' lounge on the upper ring of Concord Station. Ambassador Grell had invited nearly 40 delegates to an informal evening gathering, the kind of event that was technically social, but everyone understood was political. Drinks were served, seats were filled, and Grell stood at the center of the room with a projection screen behind him and a look on his face that was somewhere between amusement and contempt. "I thought you all deserved to see what our human colleagues have been doing with their time," he said. He tapped a control, and the screen lit up with surveillance footage from the station's public corridors. The images showed the crew of the Hearthlight carrying bundles of supplies, wrapping packages in colored paper, stringing lights along the walls of the commons area, and arranging tables with ridiculous care. Grell narrated each image like he was presenting evidence in a trial. "Here we see two human engineers spending 4 hours constructing a tree out of recycled station components. A tree. They do not even have soil." The room chuckled. "And here, their physician is carving small figures by hand. By hand. In an age of fabrication technology, this man sits with a knife and a block of wood like a primitive craftsman." The laughter grew louder. Grell continued, showing image after image. Humans singing together while they worked. A woman carefully painting a toy with a brush so small it looked absurd. A man testing whether a spinning top would work in the station's artificial gravity by dropping it 40 times in a row. "This," Grell said, "is what the newest species in the galactic community considers a good use of diplomatic time." He paused for effect. "They're making gifts. For children. Not their own children, mind you. For children of species they have barely met. Children who did not ask for gifts. Children who do not need gifts." He clicked his mandibles sharply. "This is not diplomacy. This is not culture. This is the emotional incontinence of a species that has not yet learned to separate feeling from function." The Dathani delegation laughed the hardest. They sat in a tight group near the front, clicking their approval at every point Grell made. In Dathani society, children were investments, not objects of sentiment. You fed them, educated them, and prepared them for productive roles. You did not waste resources making them feel special. Several other delegations joined in. The tall, stone-skinned Brelani found it amusing. The needle-thin Gossari seemed entertained. Even a few species that had voted in favor of the celebration laughed along, caught up in the mood of the room. But not everyone was laughing. The Fenari ambassador, a broad-shouldered woman covered in silver-white fur, sat near the back with her arms crossed. Her name was Tala, and she had 3 children aboard the station. She watched the footage of the humans working and said nothing. Her expression was unreadable behind her thick facial fur, but her tail, which Fenari could not fully control, was pressed flat against her chair. Among her people, that meant anger. Tala stood quietly and walked out of the room. Nobody noticed except one person. Counselor Shale sat in her portable water seat near the sidewall, half hidden behind a larger delegate. She watched Tala leave. Then she looked back at the screen, where a human woman was teaching a group of crew members how to fold wrapping paper into neat corners. Shale's skin turned a deep, troubled shade of green. She did not laugh. She did not speak. She stayed until the gathering ended, then returned to her quarters alone. Grell closed the evening with a toast. "To the humans," he said, raising his glass of nutrient solution. "May their little party teach them what the rest of us already know. Sentiment is not strength. It never has been." Glasses rose around the room. The laughter echoed down the corridor. That night, Rami was doing a final inventory of gifts when his communicator beeped. A short message from a station sensor alert. Someone had left another delivery outside the Hearthlight's docking port. He went to check. It was not 1 crate this time. It was 3. Different sizes, different materials, and clearly from different sources. One contained rolls of soft, high-quality fabric in colors that matched Fenari preferences. Another held small containers of a safe, edible glaze used by the Mirati for special occasions. The third was simply full of raw crafting materials, good quality, more than the humans could have gathered on their own. None of the crates had a name on them. Rami brought them inside and found Reeves in the cargo bay, reviewing the next day's schedule. 3 this time, he said, setting the manifest on her table. Reeves read through it slowly. She looked up at Rami. "Grell held his little comedy show tonight," she said. "Half the station was there. I heard. He showed footage of us working. Made everyone laugh." Rami nodded. "And yet someone sent us 3 crates of supplies after watching it." Reeves leaned back in her chair. A slow smile spread across her face. "Ridicule is a funny thing, Rami. It tells you what people are willing to say in public. But deliveries in the middle of the night tell you what they actually believe." She stood and looked at the growing wall of finished gifts, stacked neatly in rows, each one labeled with a child's name and species. "We are not as alone as Grell thinks," she said quietly. "Not even close." Outside the Hearthlight, the station hummed with its usual noise. Somewhere in the upper ring, Grell was still celebrating his joke. But down in the cargo bay, 63 humans kept working. And somewhere out there on the station, quiet hands were helping them, one anonymous crate at a time. The station commons had been an empty gray hall for as long as anyone could remember. It was designed for overflow traffic, a wide open space with high ceilings and plain metal walls. Nobody spent time there unless they had nowhere else to go. The humans changed that in 6 hours. They started before the station's artificial dawn cycle. Engineers mounted soft lighting panels along the walls, casting a warm golden glow across the room. Fabric banners in deep reds, greens, and silvers hung from the ceiling supports, swaying gently in the station's recycled air currents. Tables lined the edges, each one set with food stations designed for different species. Labels in 12 alien scripts identified every dish, along with allergy warnings and ingredient lists. At the center of the room stood the tree. It was not a real tree. Nothing about it was natural. The trunk was made from reclaimed structural tubing, welded together and sanded smooth. The branches were thin metal rods bent at careful angles, each one holding small lights made from repurposed indicator bulbs. Decorations hung from every branch, tiny handmade ornaments crafted from whatever the crew could find. Bits of colored wire twisted into stars. polished metal discs that caught the light, small fabric shapes sewn by hands that were better at repairing engines than making art, but had tried anyway. It was imperfect. It was beautiful. Reeves stood at the entrance and waited. The celebration was scheduled to begin at the 14th hour of the station cycle. At 1400, the Commons was nearly empty. A handful of human crew members stood at their stations, smiling bravely, surrounded by tables full of food and stacks of wrapped gifts that nobody was coming to collect. Rami stood beside Reeves. "Give it time," he said. "I know," she replied. But her hands were clasped tight behind her back. At 1415, the first family appeared. They were Gossari, thin and pale, with two children who clung to their parents' long legs and peered into the Commons with enormous dark eyes. Reeves greeted them at the door. She did not make a speech. She simply smiled and said, "Welcome. We're glad you are here." The Gossari parent hesitated, then stepped inside. At 1430, the Fenari arrived. Not one family. All of them. Ambassador Tala walked in at the front of the group with her 3 children beside her. Behind her came 6 more Fenari families, the children bouncing on their thick legs, their tails wagging despite their parents' attempts to keep them calm. Tala walked up to Reeves and dipped her head. "My children have been asking about this for 3 days," she said. "I could not keep them away any longer." After that, it was like a dam breaking. Families trickled in from a dozen different species. Mirati in their mobile water carriers. A pair of Brelani whose stone-skinned children moved slowly but stared at the lights with obvious wonder. Small groups of species that Reeves did not even recognize, drawn in by the glow and the music and the smell of food. The human crew moved through the crowd with practiced ease. Each one carried a small stack of gifts, sorted by name and species. They approached each child individually, kneeling or bending or adjusting their height however they needed to, and held out a wrap package. "This is for you," they said over and over, in as many languages as they could manage. The first child to open a gift was a Fenari girl. She tore through the wrapping with her claws and found a soft, bright orange stuffed animal inside. She squeezed it against her chest and made a sound that was halfway between a purr and a laugh. Her mother's tail began to wag. After that, the sounds filled the room. A Mirati child splashed happily in its carrier while solving a waterproof puzzle box. A Gossari boy held up a small woven bracelet and showed it to every person within arm's reach. 2 Brelani children sat on the floor, slowly turning a set of painted wooden blocks over and over in their thick fingers, studying the colors with quiet intensity. The translators could not keep up with all of it. Some sounds had no translation. Some expressions had no equivalent in any database. But everyone in that room understood what was happening. Children were happy. It was that simple and that enormous. Rami found Reeves standing near the tree, watching the room. There were tears on her face, but she was smiling. 412 gifts, he said. 410 delivered. Who are we missing? Rami checked his datapad. 2 Dathani children. Their families did not attend. Reeves nodded slowly. She had expected that. The Dathani were Grell's people, and Grell had made it very clear that participating in the human event was beneath them. But as Reeves scanned the room, her eyes caught something at the edge of the Commons. A small figure stood in the corridor just outside the entrance, half hidden behind a support pillar. It was a Dathani child, young, with a soft exoskeleton that had not yet fully hardened. She was small for her species, with wide eyes that reflected the golden light spilling from the Commons. She was watching everything. The lights, the tree, the children laughing and holding their gifts. She wanted to come in. That much was obvious. But she did not move. Reeves took a step toward the corridor, but Rami put a hand on her arm. "Not yet," he said quietly. "If we push, she will run." Reeves looked at the child for a long moment. Then she nodded and stepped back. Across the room, Dr. Felix Okonkwo had noticed her too. He set down the toy he was holding, reached into his coat pocket, and felt the small carved figure he had been carrying for 3 days. A thresh, 6 legs, round body, gentle eyes. He had made it for exactly this child. He just had to wait for the right moment. Her name was Nira, and she had been told not to come here. Her father was a minor trade official in the Dathani delegation. He was not important enough to attend Grell's private gatherings, but he followed Grell's opinions like they were law. When the human celebration was announced, her father had clicked his mandibles in disgust and told Nira that such events were beneath their species. The humans were soft. Their traditions were pointless. A Dathani child had no business watching lesser species play with toys. Nira had nodded and said nothing, because that was what Dathani children were supposed to do. But she had come anyway. She stood in the corridor outside the commons, pressed against the cold metal of a support pillar, and watched the golden light spill across the floor. The sounds coming from inside were strange to her. She had no word for most of them. Laughter was not common in Dathani households. Joy was considered an unproductive emotion, something to be managed and outgrown. But the sounds pulled at her. The bright flashes of color, the way the alien children moved freely, running between tables, holding things up for their parents to see. Nobody scolded them. Nobody told them to be still. Nira's hands gripped the edge of the pillar. She wanted to go inside so badly it made her chest hurt. She did not move. Dr. Felix Okonkwo had been watching her for several minutes. He stood just inside the entrance, leaning against the wall with his hands in his coat pockets, looking like he was simply resting. But his eyes had not left the small Dathani girl in the corridor. He knew what fear looked like. He had spent 20 years as a physician, and fear was the same in every species. The wide eyes, the rigid body, the way she leaned forward and then pulled herself back, caught between wanting and being afraid. Felix did not walk toward her quickly. He did not call out or wave. He simply stepped into the corridor, moved to a spot about 3 meters from where she stood, and sat down on the floor. Nira froze. Felix did not look at her directly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small carved figure. He held it in his open palm and turned it slowly, as if he were examining it for the first time. It was a thresh, the little 6-legged creature from the oldest Dathani nursery stories. Felix had carved it from a block of synthetic wood over the course of 4 nights. He had studied images from the Dathani Cultural Archive to get the proportions right. The body was round and smooth. The 6 legs were short and slightly curved. The eyes were large and gentle, the way they were always described in the stories. Nira stared at it. She knew what it was immediately. Every Dathani child knew the thresh. It was the first story they heard, the last comfort before formal schooling began and childhood was expected to end. Nira had not heard a thresh story in 2 years. Her father said she was too old for them, but she had never forgotten. Felix turned the figure in his hand one more time. Then he looked at Nira, not down at her, the way you look at a person who matters. "This is for you," he said. His voice was quiet and steady. "You do not have to do anything for it. You do not have to earn it. It is yours because I wanted you to have it." Nira did not move for a long time. Her mandibles trembled slightly, a gesture that in Dathani body language meant she was trying very hard not to feel something. Then she took 1 step forward, and another, and another. She reached out with both hands and took the thresh from Felix's palm. Her fingers closed around it carefully, as if it were alive. She held it against her chest and looked down at it, and her entire body seemed to soften. She did not say thank you. Dathani children were not taught to say thank you for personal gifts because personal gifts did not exist in their culture. But she smiled. It was small. It was barely there. But Felix saw it, and it was enough to make his eyes sting. He did not say anything else. He simply nodded, stood up slowly, and walked back into the commons. Nira stayed in the corridor, holding the thresh. She turned it over in her hands, running her fingers along the carved legs, touching the smooth, round eyes. She pressed it against her cheek, a gesture that Felix would never know was the Dathani equivalent of a hug. Inside the commons, someone else had watched the entire moment. Counselor Shale stood near the food tables, her translucent body glowing a deep and shifting blue. Her layered eyes were wet. Among the Mirati, tears were rare. Their bodies were designed for water, but crying was something they almost never did. It required an emotion strong enough to override biology. Shale wiped her eyes with a slow, careful motion. Then she walked across the commons to where Captain Reeves stood near the tree. "Captain," Shale said. Reeves turned. She saw the tears on Shale's face and said nothing, waiting. "I abstain from the vote," Shale said. "I want you to know that I am ashamed of that." Reeve shook her head. "You are here now. That is what matters." Shale looked back toward the corridor where Nira still stood, clutching her small carved animal. "I have attended 400 diplomatic functions on this station," Shale said quietly. "I have never seen anyone do what your doctor just did." She paused. Her skin shifted to a color Reeves had never seen before, something between gold and silver, warm and bright. "On behalf of the Mirati Collective," Shale said, "I thank you, formally and completely." Reeves took her hand gently. "You are welcome." Formally and completely. That night, word of what happened spread across the station. Not through official channels, not through news feeds. It spread the way things always spread when they truly matter. One person told another, who told another, who told another. By morning, everyone on Concord Station had heard about the human celebration, and about the small Dathani girl who had never been given a gift in her life, and about the human doctor who sat on a cold metal floor and changed that. The Trade Summit chamber had never been this quiet at the start of the session. Every seat was filled. Delegates from 26 species sat in the curved rows, their translators humming at low volume, their eyes fixed on the central podium. The usual noise of side conversations and shuffling documents was absent. Something was different today, and everyone in the room could feel it. Ambassador Grell stood at the podium. He had called an emergency motion before the regular agenda began. His exoskeleton gleamed under the chamber lights, polished and sharp. He looked like a man who had come prepared for a fight. "Colleagues," he began, his translator converting his clicks into crisp, measured words. "I stand before you to formally request that this council censure the human delegation for their actions during the unauthorized cultural event held yesterday in the station commons." He paused, letting the words settle. What the humans conducted was not a celebration. It was a calculated emotional manipulation targeting the children of sovereign species. They used gifts, music, and spectacle to bypass diplomatic channels and appeal directly to the most vulnerable members of our delegations. His voice hardened. "This is not diplomacy. This is exploitation dressed in colored paper." He looked around the chamber, expecting nods. He found silence. Captain Reeves sat in the human section with her hands folded in her lap. Her face was calm. Rami sat beside her, his datapad untouched on the desk in front of him. They did not speak. Grell continued, "I move that the council formally reprimand the human delegation and prohibit any future cultural events of this nature on Concord Station." He stepped back from the podium and waited. The chamber remained silent for 5 long seconds. Then a chair scraped against the floor in the Fenari section. Ambassador Tala stood. Her silver-white fur was neatly groomed, and her posture was rigid with formality. But her tail was raised high behind her, a sign among Fenari of absolute conviction. "My children slept through the night for the first time since we arrived on this station," she said. Her voice was steady and clear. "My youngest daughter has not released the toy the humans gave her. She carried it to breakfast. She carried it here. She is holding it right now in the family quarters." Tala looked directly at Grell. "If this is manipulation, Ambassador, then I welcome it. Because no Dathani trade agreement has ever made my child feel safe." She sat down. The chamber stirred. A delegate from the Gossari stood next. He was thin and quiet, a species not known for public speeches. "My son has asked me 3 times this morning when the humans will have another celebration," he said simply. I did not have an answer for him. "I would like to." He sat. Then the Brelani delegate rose, speaking slowly in the deep rumble of his species. "My people do not understand human customs," he admitted. "But my children spent the evening touching painted blocks and showing them to strangers. They have never approached strangers before." He paused. "I do not know what the humans did, but it worked." One by one, delegates stood. Not all of them, not even most of them, but enough. Each one shared a small story. A child who had laughed. A family that had eaten food prepared by a species they had never spoken to. A moment that could not be measured in trade agreements or diplomatic points, but mattered anyway. Grell stood perfectly still through all of it. His exoskeleton clicked once, twice, then stopped. When the chamber fell quiet, Counselor Shale rose from her water seat. She was small compared to most delegates, and she spoke softly. But the chamber went absolutely silent when she began. I have served on this council for 19 years, she said. In that time, I have watched us measure greatness in weapons, in trade surpluses, in territory, in the size of our fleets. She paused, her skin glowing a calm, steady gold. Yesterday, I watched a human doctor sit on a cold floor and give a hand-carved toy to a child who had never received a gift in her life. She looked around the chamber. That child did not ask for it. She did not earn it. She was not rewarded for good behavior or academic performance. She was given something beautiful simply because a stranger decided she deserved to be happy. Shale turned to Grell. Ambassador, you asked this council to censure the humans for emotional manipulation. I asked this council to consider the possibility that what we witnessed was not manipulation at all. It was something much more dangerous to people like us who have forgotten what it looks like. She let the silence hold for a moment. It was kindness, she said, and a civilization's greatness is not measured by its trade surplus. It is measured by how it treats the smallest and most vulnerable among all peoples. She sat down. Grell's motion was put to a vote. It failed. 22 against. 3 in favor. 1 abstention. Grell did not speak again during the session. The summit continued with its regular agenda. Trade proposals were discussed. Agreements were negotiated. The machinery of galactic commerce turned as it always did. But something had shifted. After the session ended, Reeves was walking through the corridor toward the hearthlight when she heard the sharp click of Dathani footsteps behind her. She turned. Grell stood there. His posture was stiff. His mandibles were pressed tightly together. He looked like a man swallowing something that tasted terrible. Captain, he said. Ambassador. A long pause. The Dathani do not have holidays, he said. We do not celebrate children. We do not give gifts. Each word came out like he was pulling it from somewhere deep and reluctant. I am beginning to consider the possibility that this is not a strength. Reeves said nothing. She waited. If the humans were willing, Grell said slowly, the Dathani might benefit from understanding how such traditions are built. It was not an apology. It was not an admission of defeat. But for a Dathani ambassador, it was the closest thing to both. Reeves did not gloat. She did not smile in victory. She simply nodded. It will be our honor, she said. Grell held her gaze for one more moment. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps clicking sharply against the station floor. That evening, Reeves stood at the observation window near the docking ring and looked out at the stars. Rami found her there. The Commons is still decorated, he said. Some of the alien families asked if they could keep the lights up for a few more days. Leave them, Reeves said. Rami leaned against the window beside her. Felix is already carving new figures. Says he got requests from 6 different species. Reeves laughed softly. Of course he did. Below them, through the observation glass, they could see the Commons level. Small figures moved through the corridor. Children of different species walking together. A Fenari girl showing her stuffed animal to a Gossari boy. 2 Brillani children sitting cross-legged on the floor, stacking painted blocks while a Mirati child watched from its water carrier, splashing with excitement. And among them, walking slowly with her small carved thresh held tightly in both hands, was Nira. She was showing it to a Fenari child, holding it up so the other girl could see. The Fenari girl reached out and touched it gently. Nira pulled it back and held it close, but she was smiling. Reeves watched them for a long time. The galaxy had learned many things about humans over the past 11 years. That they were stubborn, that they were adaptable, that they could fight when they needed to and talk when fighting was not the answer. But this was the lesson that would last the longest. The most dangerous thing about humans was not their strength, their technology, or their refusal to give up. It was their quiet, stubborn insistence that every child in the universe deserved to feel loved.